Hello, hello, hello. Welcome you all. Please turn your attention to our interpretation team.
Hola, mi nombre es Abraham y voy a dar este mensaje en español y después en inglés. Hi, my name is Abraham and I'll be making this announcement in Spanish and then in English. Como mencioné, mi nombre es Abraham y junto con Irving estaremos interpretando de inglés a español durante la sesión de hoy. El crear espacios multilingües no es solo responsabilidad de los intérpretes, sino de todas las personas presentes. Por eso, les pedimos que nos ayuden hablando a ritmo moderado, voz alta y claramente. Y no sufran en silencio. Si tienen algún inconveniente, nos dejan saber a través de la caja chat. El día de hoy hay interpretación en Zoom y también va a haber el lenguaje a señas americano. Al pie de su pantalla va a haber un globo terráqueo si están aquí con su computadora. Si están aquí con su celular, van a ver 3 puntitos al pie de su pantalla a mano derecha. Seleccione el globo terráqueo o los 3 puntitos, seleccione su idioma de español y asegúrese de poner finalizado. Favor de hablar en el canal del idioma que haya seleccionado. Cualquier pregunta nos deja saber a través de la caja chat. Ahora digo este mensaje en español, perdón, en inglés. Hi, my name is Abraham, and along with Erwin, we'll be interpreting in English to Spanish during today's event. Creating a multilingual space is not only the responsibility of the interpreters, but of everyone here, which is why we asked you can help us out by speaking at a moderate pace, loudly, and clearly. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please let us know through the chat. And just basically remember to breathe when you speak. Zoom with interpretation has been enabled, and there will also be ASL interpretation as well. If you're here with a computer, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a globe. If you're here with a cell phone, you'll see 3 dots on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You can select the globe or the 3 dots. You will see a menu pop up. Select your language, English. Make sure to hit done once you selected that. Please speak in the channel that you've selected. And just remember, if you go into a breakout room, make sure to select again your language. And again, if you're having any difficulties, please let us know through the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Abraham, for that. And now, as we come back, I'd like to welcome you all back once again to our second day of our National Prevention Town Hall event in solidarity across movements. So thank you all who were with us yesterday, and those of you who are returning again today, and our newcomers. We are so happy to have you. We at NRCDV, the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, are enjoying to put on this presentation for you all. It is a packed, huge, powerful presentation of events that will be happening today. So we like to all welcome you back into this space and hope that you will enjoy the presentations as much as we enjoyed putting them together. So welcome and happy to be here with you. I am LaVon Morris Grant, the Director of Community Engagement at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. And I've been in this space for almost 30 years and working in the housing space specifically. So happy to be here with you and happy to be your moderator for today's event. So if you have any issues that you need, please use the chat. And for now, if you like, you can just add your name, your position, and your organization in the chat to do networking with the rest of the participants on the call. And if you see on the screen, you can read along with me when I do get to the housekeeping issues. But for right now, I welcome you again as I like to open with the land acknowledgement. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather today, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home on the region we occupy today. I'm joining from the land of Muskogee Creek and Cherokee peoples. We would like to honor all the ancestral stewards of the Northeast region and their descendants living in over 1,000 tribes, nations, bands, pueblos, communities, or native villages. We would also like to acknowledge the underrepresentation of Indigenous voices in the prevention scene. It's our intention to continue to build relationships that allow us to better address this gap through our work. Thank you for that. And we invite you all to participate in helping us close the gap and inviting more Indigenous relationships into prevention work. And so with that, before we get started, we like to review some brief housekeeping notes, as I mentioned. And those housekeeping notes consist of what you can see on the screen and let you all know we are recording the event and we'll share it through our website. We are offering a live caption feature for all of our events. You can access this feature by clicking on caption at the bottom of your screen. Remember, the public chat is open and visible to everyone participating in this webinar session. Please reach out to our staff if you are experiencing ongoing technical issues. So with that, we will move in. Before we turn the floor over to our presenters, we would like to make all participants aware of our wellness room. This is meant to be a place of respite for those who may need to step away. And please make use of that. A Care Bear will be present. I like that, a Care Bear will be present and available there if needed. You can access this space at any time by clicking on the breakout room icon at the bottom of your screen. When the wellness room box pops up, hover over the number in the upper right-hand corner and the word join should appear. Click on that to join the wellness room. And so on yesterday, the sessions were really, really powerful. And I'm not making that up. I wish I had another word for that. And because of what added to it being so powerful is we are very, very grateful to Andre Mitchell of On the Right Mind for capturing these beautiful graphics recordings for us. And as you go through this slide deck of the beautiful captions that Andre was able to do, really just send her some thumbs ups or encouragement on the work that she was able to capture in live time and create these gorgeous artistic images, illustrations for us to look at. So yes, we will let that slide show go through as I give us a little bit more information on Andre. Andre will continue to provide live graphic illustration for each of today's sessions. And yes, we are pleased to partner with On the Right Mind for this event. A woman of color owned small business that provides graphic recording and strategic illustration to organizations and movements working towards social justice and creating a world where we all thrive. And then you can access these recordings in our Padlet. I tell you, technology is something. In our Padlet, where we encourage you to keep adding your takeaways and action steps from each session throughout the day. So go on over there and visit that Padlet and see how it works and add your interpretations of what you are gaining from the sessions or any recommendations, indoor solutions. We would love to look through that. So thank you for that. And now we are pleased to pass the floor to our very own Town Hall Weaver, Monet Johnson.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here for day 2 of this wonderful town hall. Like Lavon said, we were really grounded in so much wonderful information yesterday. We heard about Black survivorship and what it means to support Black survivors in meaningful ways. We learned about partnering with Black organizations in meaningful ways. And one of the things that really stuck out to me yesterday after I had the pleasure of sharing some of my story is the connection between supporting youth that was raised in one of the sessions yesterday. Today, you're going to hear a lot about that from one of the speakers from Girls for Gender Equity, and I'm so excited. But before that, I want to ground us in another June Jordan poem, a poem that means so much to me. It's called Resolution 1003, where she says, "I will love who loves me. I will love as much as I am loved. I will hate who hates me. I will feel nothing for everyone oblivious to me. I will stay indifferent to indifference. I will live hostile to hostility, and I will make myself a passionate and eager lover in response to passionate and eager love. I will be nobody's fool." When I think about what it means to be a survivor of anything, and what it means to practice resistance and also practice healing, I always return to that really, really wonderful poem, because I think June Jordan as a feminist really captured what it means to live and survive after any form of violence. Still being a Black feminist and practicing moments of resistance and refusing to bow down to patriarchy, refusing to normalize these incidents of violence, refusing to let people take away your bodily autonomy, but also still being able to have a capacity to be a warm and loving person, contrary to what misogynistic people believe. We have a right to be angry as Black women, and also we know when to put that down. We know when to be loving, and we know how to make ourselves passionate and eager lovers in response to passionate and eager love. And so when I think about the community of Black women and gender nonconforming survivors and survivor advocates, I always think about how much we hold each other with so much care, love, and intention, while also refusing to act as if patriarchal violence does not exist. And that's what it means to be nobody's fool. And so I'm so happy about that. I also want to ground us a little bit in the youth written pamphlet that Ponny, who's going to speak later on today, had a hand in writing, where the Black youth talked about bodily autonomy and choice. And they said, "Choice is essentially part of bodily autonomy, a key tenet of reproductive justice, and an essential element of achieving reproductive freedom. However, people who are young, disabled, queer, Black or brown, or otherwise marginalized are often left to deal with the emotional, physical, financial, and emotional consequences of decisions that someone else has made for them. It's within our rights to have options and to make a choice. Reproductive rights are human rights. In denying someone's choice, their human right to their own bodily autonomy is denied, which has profound implications on their overall well-being." And my favorite part of what they said is, "No one can tell me about my body better than me. We may be young, but we understand. We know what we are going through and how it is affecting us. We know what we are feeling and what we need. Yet, parental control implies that young people are incapable of making these choices for themselves, thus enforcing the assumption that we do not know our own bodies and removing our power to choose." I want to reiterate this again. They said, "No one can tell me about my body better than me. We may be young, but we understand. We know what we are going through and how it is affecting us." So as we move into the next session, I really hope that we can stay grounded in those words from the youth, and we can stay grounded in how that applies to survivors, and we can always hone in on the innate knowledge that we have as people who are in this struggle together. We know what we're going through, we know what we need, and today we're going to find out a little bit more about what we need with each other. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it right back to you, Levon.
Thank you so much, Monet, for that. The poems are awesome. I so appreciate you. You all will probably hear me throughout this moderating, to ask us and to remind us more so to please slow down our talking, because the interpreters cannot keep up with the fast pace. And so to help them and those who are in need of the interpretation, we have to remember to stay mindful to do that so that they can participate as well as the rest of us. And so I have to constantly remind myself, being a New Yorker, living in Atlanta, Georgia, to slow down myself, because I tend to speak very fast. So if we all could stay centered to that for today, to slow down as we transition into our sessions. And I know we tend to go back into our natural rhythm of speaking, but for today's purposes, can we just please stay mindful and centered to breathe and speak slowly? Okay, now with that being said, I hope I don't speed up. It's time to transition to our first session today, a roundtable conversation on the intersections between violence prevention and reproductive justice. Wow, this should be a great one. Please welcome our speakers, Ditra Edwards of SISTA Fire, Lucy Rios of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I believe Lucy is the executive director. I want to acknowledge that. Megan Simmons of MRS Consulting, and Ponny White of Girls for Gender Equity. Ditra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I am centering on slowing down, because we need that in every part of our life, every single day, especially as women of color. Woo! All that we do. Thank you all. We're excited to be together. We, as a group, really wanted to open today with another quote. Those words that we just heard were so connected to my soul and so deeply appreciated. One of the things that we really wanted to explore as we enter our conversation is understanding this beautiful quote from Anandati Roy. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Those breaths are our breaths. On those quiet moments is when we are able to sit still and really engage our whole bodies towards our own futures. When we are here collectively together, this is a way in which we get to move towards another world. We'd love for you to put your comments in the chat about your own reflections on that quote. I am going to hand this off right now to Megan, and she's going to introduce our next step in this process. Thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. So happy to be with you all in this space today. We are going to center some of our thoughts today regarding with a video. It's an introduction to reproductive justice. And this wonderful creation was the catalyst was started by, or created by, excuse me, Color of Change.
For years, the experiences of Black women, trans people, and non-binary people have been excluded in the fight for reproductive rights. The mainstream pro-choice movement has failed to address that there is no choice where there is no access. By focusing on abortion rights alone, advocacy ignores the barriers marginalized folks face when trying to access things like safe abortions, contraception, and sex education. In 1994, a group of Black women coined the term reproductive justice when they noticed there was little mention of health services like pre- and postnatal care, fibroid screenings, or STI testing in healthcare reform, and little understanding of how things like income, housing, and the criminal justice system affect Black women's reproductive choices. They recognized that the women's rights movement, dominated and led by middle-class, wealthy white women, could not represent the needs of women of color and other marginalized people, and called for an intersectional approach to reproductive health care. The argument that abortion is an individual decision flattens the problem into a binary, pro-choice versus pro-life. Intersectionality reveals how multiple systems of oppression work together and limit access to reproductive options for Black women and other marginalized groups. Since our arrival in the United States, Black women have been targets of reproductive oppression, from being worked and bred like animals to being forcibly tested on like lab mice. Our bodies have been controlled inhumanly for centuries. In the 1900s, a new strain of racism emerged called eugenics, a pseudoscience devoted to proving white racial superiority, which led to the forced sterilization of many women of color. Between 1970 and 1980, sterilization cases rose from 200,000 to 700,000. Teaching hospitals across the South routinely performed unnecessary hysterectomies on poor Black women. In 1973, Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Ralph were just 12 and 14 years old when they were sterilized without consent under a federally funded program. As you can see, Black women's reproduction has historically been viewed as negative. To this day, Black maternal mortality rates are the highest of any racial or ethnic group in the country, with many Black women reporting being dismissed when complaining about extreme pain. The effects of these types of injustices are felt for generations. And with bans like the Hyde Amendment and the Family Cap directly impacting people already facing systemic barriers to care, they continue to be ignored. The current conversation is focused on the stripping of rights afforded under Roe v. Wade, but for many Black and poor people around the country, these rights have never been actualized. Black women-led reproductive justice organizations like Sister Song, Ancient Song Doula Services, Black Women's Health Imperative, and others have been fighting to keep women of color and trans and non-binary people's voices at the forefront of the movement. It's time we shift the conversation to what needs to change and address the social, political, and economic inequalities impacting a woman's ability to access reproductive health care. It's not enough for abortion to remain legal. In order to truly have reproductive justice, we need to address all the issues involved. To learn more and take action, visit liberatedbodies.org.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy Rios. I am the Executive Director of the Rhode Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm also a proud member of SISTA Fire and really am honored to be a part of this conversation that we're having today about the intersections of reproductive justice and domestic violence. I want to create some space for folks to add comments in the chat. They have them, any reflections that they have around this powerful 3-minute video that we just watched, and that as a planning committee, we wanted to open with. Because the video does a beautiful job of explaining how Black women and non-binary people of color have been excluded from mainstream reproductive rights advocacy. This means that their lived experiences, the barriers that they face with systems, and how it affects their reproductive choices is not acknowledged in the work. And I really appreciate how the video provides the historical context of the ways that Black women's reproductive health has been systematically controlled in the United States, and really acknowledges the violence Black women endured and continue to experience today. Let me see if there are any comments in the chat right now. I'm not seeing any, but I will share some more
Any
reflections
thoughts?
that I do have. So please share them in the chat, and we'll keep rolling. Really like how reproductive justice is defined, right? And requires us to look at multiple systems of oppression and how they work together to limit reproductive options for Black women and non-binary people of color. And this includes Black and non-binary birthing people that are survivors of domestic violence. The other thing that the video does a really great job on is connecting reproductive justice to other issues, right? To food insecurity, to income insecurity, gender, abortion access, and I would add survivor justice to that list. I have been in the work to end domestic violence for a couple of decades now, and I started, my roots are in domestic violence primary prevention. And in that work, in domestic violence prevention work, we've come to understand that if we really want to prevent domestic violence, it requires us to do so much more than to provide information and education, right? We must and we are working to address the root causes of intimate partner violence to prevent it from happening in the first place by focusing on changing social norms and conditions in our community that are unjust and that allow violence to exist. And with domestic violence, what we know is that at the core of it, it's power and control. Like when one person uses abusive tactics to maintain power and control over their partner. And this dynamic is rooted in systems of oppression on the societal level. So racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, transphobia, to name some. Those systems of oppression create conditions like poverty, the lack of educational and economic opportunity, harmful gender norms, which are factors that increase the risks for domestic violence. Also, and similarly in the reproductive justice movement, they recognize that reproductive justice will be achieved when all people have the resources, as well as the economic, social, and political power to make healthy decisions about their bodies, sexuality, and reproduction. And so addressing racial and socioeconomic inequities that deny Black women and non-binary people of color reproductive justice, it will also prevent domestic violence. Finally, let me take a quick look in the chat.
Looks like you do have a someone in
Yeah,
the chat.
do you want to read it? Sure.
Sure, I'm happy to read it if you like. No worries. Hi, folks. My apologies. I know I was off mute when I was typing, so you probably heard tap, 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 because I do like to engage folks in the chat. It looks like Ms. Angelica Brodier, please forgive me if I mispronounced your name, but it says that the dates put this in better perspective and why this needs to be discussed, even though some want to say we don't. I do think that's important to have some context and historical knowledge of kind of how these movements and were essentially made and who came together and why they came together. Those kinds of things are important, so we ensure that we center those things as we move forward and work together. Like Lucy mentioned, you can't divide some of these things because there are institutional components that we have to address. And so I think it's really important to have some historical knowledge so we can know where folks started, see where we are, and then get a better understanding of what we would like to see in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Megan. And before I turn it right back over to you, I just wanted to make one last point around this connection around domestic violence prevention and its intersections with reproductive justice, and knowing that when you work with survivors of domestic violence, we know many of them experience reproductive coercion, you know, where an abusive partner may sabotage birth control or restrict access to reproductive health care and abortion. And this leads to like physical and economic consequences for the victim, where they might struggle to care for themselves and their children. And as we continue to talk today, we'll keep unpacking this further in our conversation and keep making those connections to how domestic violence prevention and reproductive justice work really align, and it's really is moving in the same direction. So thank you to those that contributed in the chat, and I'll turn it over to Megan now.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and transition into the questions section of the presentation, you all. In case you haven't noticed, this is a pretty free flowing conversation. We certainly do encourage you all to engage us in the chat and share any comments that you may have, and feel free to add us. All of us are checking our comments, so just to share that with you. Up first, we are gonna discuss what roles does reproductive justice play in these movements. I think reproductive justice plays a really pivotal role. Some of the things that we've already kind of touched on. It's a reminder, and I should slow down. I think we were warned about that earlier in the presentation. But like I was saying, I think it's a reminder that while we're all out working and making change, we have to make sure that we remind ourselves why we started these things. There are institutions that are inherently racist, that are sexist, that are patriarchal. And so we need to be cognizant of those things in all of our movements. I think it's important that we are reminded of those things so that we don't create even more barriers for folks that we try, that we claim that we're trying to assist. It's important to listen more oftentimes than we do. And I think the intersections of things like housing, economics, food insecurity definitely gives rise to why we see the intersection of the violence, particularly in communities that are marginalized. You know, my work has been based in reproductive health, but also in domestic violence and sexual assault. And then particularly serving culturally specific communities. I can't divorce myself from things like the economic impact, the educational impact, and the housing impact that those communities and my community, most importantly, face. And so to me, the through line is the lack of equity on all fronts and trying to make shifts that'll make things a little bit more equitable for folks. And doing what needs to be done, not necessarily making things even. I think it's important for folks to make those distinctions because people need different things. Any thoughts from my esteemed colleagues?
Well, one of the things that I would just say, Ditra from SISTA, SISTA is a member-based organization, and so our membership is made up of women of color and non-binary folks of color. And as an example, one of the core things that we see in our work, especially through the pandemic, right, that we saw the crisis hit our families deeply. And it was hitting us through people's all levels of access, people not being able to pay their utilities, people not being able to cover their rent. And we still see this going on continuously over these years, as they say, that it is over, COVID time is over. But the implications for the rise of domestic violence during that time was very real. We phone banked every month, almost every week, just checking in on our membership in our community to identify what folks need and what's happening. And one of the things that emerged was the number of challenges people were having in their own home, with their families, with their domestic partners. And it caught us by surprise because we weren't at that time just focused on like talking about domestic violence, but our partnership with the Rhode Island Coalition allowed us to really talk with Lucy and other folks on her team about, this is what we're seeing. What does this mean? How do we address this? And how do we become much more aware about what to do about these situations? It really pushed us in reproductive justice to really formulate deeper relationships. And I think when we think about people's experiences inside of institutions, it's really the other place that we see this. We have a birth justice campaign that we're running, and it is looking at the medical racism inside the hospitals. And one of the largest challenges that women experience there is the surveillance, right, on their bodies about how they are, what's happening in their relationship, and fear of their children being taken away from them by DCYF, because they make assumptions about what's happening in homes based on what they see visually, right? Only what they see, not what they know. And so in that process, it's been really challenging. We have also found just the sexual trauma that people experience. When you're inside institutions that are they doing trauma-informed care? Because the way in which people are being triggered. So this work is so layered around how we intersect with each other, around reproductive justice, right? We're trying to think about what is happening in our communities, how people are experiencing things, and how do we create healthier environments. But we're also understanding the implications of the internal racism inside institutions and their practices and how they do what they do. And our campaign really had to push back. And one of our demands was, how do you better train your people on trauma-informed care? And I would say, I see someone saying implicit bias, but it's more than implicit bias, right? Implicit bias is about an individual's biases. Structural is about what is happening with the policies inside of institutions. Because people want to make domestic violence about what's happening to an individual, but what does it mean about what is happening to us collectively inside of institutions? Those are the things that we have to really struggle with also, in getting institutions to begin to think about how they change what they do.
So
Ponny, I think there's a great question for you.
I was
Go, Megan.
So how does the reproductive justice impacting young people, Ponny, including preteens? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I would say that repro justice, the repro movement is impacting young people because I think we're at a point where we are engaging young people, where we are having these conversations, where there's a lot of great advocates, myself included, and especially the work that we're doing at Girls for Gender Equity, that's about like, how can we reframe a lot of our message and a lot of the work that we're doing to also like include this demographic. Because originally when reproductive justice was coined and it was designed to bring in folks who were marginalized, who weren't a part of the original movement that was taking the movement that was taking place around like healthcare justice and rights for folk birthing people, right? Like it was very specific to white middle class women. And so repro justice was this call for inclusion, this call for recognizing our different, I'm blanking on the word, intersectionalities, right? Like the intersectionalities of our identities. That was a big call for repro justice. But I think at that time, it wasn't specifically like young people weren't specifically named, right? We were talking about more people of color. We're talking about Black women, and we're including Black LGBT people. And if we were talking about young people, we were talking about young people as like cause and effect, right? Like, so the family dynamic is the cause, who's affected, the kids. And so it was more of like this, like, if we can help families, if we can help moms and like, and all what, like how all families look, if we can support them, then children will be well. Now I think we're pushing back and saying like, no, we have to talk about like young people as like the people who are experiencing like injustice in a system where, you know, access to abortion is being revoked, in a system where folks are being policed, our bodies are being policed, we're being criminalized. So when we talk about criminalization, young people have always kind of been under that microscope. So you think about like something that a lot of people don't think about. A lot of young people can't access contraceptives in certain states, right? Without like parental consent, right? Without like a parent going with them. A lot of young people can't go and see a provider without parental consent, right? And now it's just increasing. And we see that policing on young LGBT bodies, right? Like young trans youth have to go through, you know, these channels of having parental consent. Well, what happens if you have a parent who is not affirming of your identity? What happens if you have a parent who maybe for whatever reasons is not, you know, understanding of why you as a young person needs access to contraceptives, that you maybe this is a choice that you want to make to have an abortion. Like what happens when we have those restrictions put upon young people, where now we're seeing like they are making risky decisions. They are straying away from some of the practices that we readily talk about, which is like inclusive, comprehensive sex ed. So I think like the reproductive justice movement, including young people, is extremely important. And I'm glad that we're pushing for it at this moment, but definitely young people should have always been in these spaces. And we should have always been centering them because young people are a marginalized class for a plethora of reasons. So I'm like I stated before, a lot of what we're currently doing, our push for our reproductive justice coalition at Girls for Gender Equity, is to not only bring young people in and empower them to support their communities, but also take a very comprehensive view on like what does that reproductive justice mean in community, you know, not just like on a systems level, but also like, what does it mean for us to support young people as an individual? What does it mean for us to support a young person who is being a childcare provider for their family? What does it mean for us to support young people in the carceral system? Like, what does reproductive access look like for a young person in jail? So it's very big, it's very vast. And I'm glad that we're starting to have that conversation and make those changes.
One thing I want us to also remember to expand, and we've been leaning into this, is one of the core parts of reproductive justice is about raising a family in a safe and healthy environment, right? So it is about all of us. Someone made a comment about men in the chat. Pony's lifting up these critical issues about young people. This is all of us, right? If we're talking about safe and healthy environments, that our communities is a place where we want to raise our children, the implications of what is happening in our environments around people's ability to make a living wage, people's ability to get quality health care, people having access to transportation when you need it, right? Affordable transportation, housing, the session behind us, critical. Housing is a core part of reproductive justice. What they say, if you have quality, healthy, affordable housing, you are 50% there. Not 100, but 50% there. Housing is such a critical thing in all of our communities. The number of young people that are unhoused today, all of these things have implications on what is happening in our environment. And reproductive justice is trying to consider all of that in the implications of how we do our work. And we really, at SISTA Fire, really, our members really look at all of those things because they are directly impacted. You know, those common threads between the reproductive justice and domestic violence is the powerful work that you all are doing around people who are directly impacted leading. Ponny just said it, right? Young people have to lead. Women who are directly impacted have to lead. Partners who are impacted have to be part of that leadership process. Instead of it being led by advocates, people who are experienced, people who are closest to the issue. These things are critical to the way in which we do our work, and we move forward in how we create change together.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ditra. And I just want to say, like, at the coalition, we have there's a task force of survivors, SOAR, Sisters Overcoming Abusive Relationships, and that's what they're doing, right? They are leading, they are identifying what are the priorities, what has to be our top legislative priority for the session, what systems advocacy needs to be worked on, who are the people that need to be trained, and they're part of those trainings as well, right? They're giving voice and visibility to the experiences and the challenges that primarily women are experiencing in living and thriving in their community because they're affected by domestic violence. And so I just wanted to name that for folks as we're focusing on the Northeast region, that we do have that task force in Rhode Island, and they're willing to go out. I know they've talked with other states and other coalitions to help establish one in those communities as well.
I also just wanted to respond to that question. I didn't see it when I was talking because I'm so tunnel vision. But I just want to say that another thing that I was thinking about is, again, right, this idea of like where reproductive justice came from. I guess sometimes I think even when we say intersectionality, I think we think like intersectionality within repro, like period. But like it was a call to be like, yeah, my gender experiences issues, but my race also experiences issues. And like, where do I navigate? Because this current movement is only talking about gender inequities. And so it's like, when you understand that like reproductive justice, right, it's this huge framework, this huge umbrella. It's also like what you said earlier, it's also talking about housing justice, right? Like it's also talking about, you know, like being able to have a job, education, all of the things, because we know, like as folk, like as people of color, like oftentimes when those other pieces, or when you're experiencing a lot of inequities in those other sectors of your life, or those other pieces are not where they need to be for you to live a thriving life, your reproductive health care like struggles as well. So if you don't have an address to be able to, you know, maybe go to a certain clinic or hospital nearby that requires that, then what? And you think about that with like immigrant families and communities. A lot of immigrant communities experience so much reproductive adversity because they're experiencing adversity from being immigrant in this country, because it's things like, oh, maybe, you know, you don't have your visa set up right, or something that isn't right. So therefore you can't access medical, like, help, and then if you can't access medical help, you can't access repro help. So it all is, when we say intersectional, it's not just like, oh, you coming in a reproductive space and all of your, you know, the intersections of that space, but it's the intersections of you as an entire being, and like, how can we tackle that? So I think when talking to men, I mean, one, I just say that men have repro rights and needs as well, regardless if you are cishet, but regardless if you are trans, regardless if you are a LGBT man, like men have reproductive health needs and like things that they should be educated around as well, how to lead, you know, healthy lives. So like that's just in and of itself. But if someone's struggling to really understand the concept of reproductive justice, I like to always say that reproductive justice to me is the most radical form of like advocacy, because it's full, it's hitting all the corners. We can't talk, you know, Black rights and liberation without talking repro rights. And so it's kind of bringing it all together. So I would say that's a way to kind of like engage like men, and then pivot into some of the things that, you know, that are happening to them. Like, you know, how are you accessing, you know, contraceptive? When was the last time you got a checkup? Like things like that around healthcare. Like that's repro care as well. What does your relationships look like? What, you know, maybe a lot of men experience sexual violence in childhood and don't even know it, right? So it's like all of those things that I think you can touch on to like start having a conversation with like the men in your life about like the importance of reproductive justice for them as humans.
Thank you for that, Ponny. I want to add one last thing related to that question around engaging men. In Rhode Island, we have a program called 10 Men, and under the leadership of Krista and Devin and Cynthia, they have taken on this very issue and thinking about how can men challenge like harmful gender norms and masculinity norms that contribute to the violence that exists in our communities, but how can they also like be active and engaged in making sure that we actually have equitable communities and policies and programs in our communities. And so this past year, there was an addition to their curriculum to include that, to have a conversation about where are men and how can they be better allies or co-conspirators in this area around advocating for gender and basically equitable policies. So I wanted to make sure that I named that.
So I think we've touched on quite a few topics, and we have really done a good job of discussing intersections of race, gender, intersections with immigrant communities and the LGBTQ plus community. I think now is a perfect segue into some discussion about solidarity, how we define it, what it looks like, and why it's so important to build it. Lucy, can you give us some thoughts around solidarity?
Yes, I can get us started for sure, and then welcome. Excited to hear what the rest of the panel will say. So when I hear the word solidarity, I immediately think of collective liberation, that none of us are free until Black women are free. And that if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would be free, because Black women's freedom requires like that we eradicate the destruction of like systems of oppression. And so really understanding that with solidarity, that it means that our liberation is tied to one another, and that we're doing the work to examine how anti-Blackness is showing up in ourselves and in spaces. And so I think about what I've learned in domestic violence prevention, and then being a member of SISTA, it's just become much more clearer that how much power there is in solidarity. It's so powerful when when Black, Indigenous, Southeast Asian folks, Latinx folks come together, people of color come together and organize collectively on an issue. So much so that white supremacy like actively is trying to stop that, right? And trying to block solidarity. So I think two comments that I wanted to offer is like the first one is to folks of color, right? That how important it is, it's critical that people of color, you know, actively participate in anti-racist advocacy and like express solidarity with like the Black Lives Matter movement and other Black-led campaigns in their community, and that there's a real commitment to working in collaboration and unity with other women that have been oppressed and non-binary people of color. In SISTA Fire, we as Ditra said in the beginning, I'll just say, like, another world is possible. And we can have that world where, like, Black women and all of us are free from this violence and this oppression and exploitation. But it requires that we have a collective and, like, united movement to be able to do that. And that we're okay with and understand why we have to center those that are most impacted, right? And that's usually Black women and non-binary folks of color. And not allow ourselves to, at least for folks of color, to not allow ourselves to be influenced by, like, ideas that are rooted in white supremacy, like that, you know, censoring Black women, like, why are we censoring not women, and what about our issues? That that's a deterrent, like, that's a distraction that gets in the way of us building and working together. And then the last thing I'll say is for white folks, because yesterday we heard a lot from the panelists. They talked a lot about solidarity and being a co-conspirator and what that can look like in action. And I think the most important thing that I took away was how it really means for white people to take responsibility for learning and unlearning about racism, and then taking action and working in solidarity with Black-led movements for justice, so that they get kind of pushed past white fragility, so that they can then actively disrupt the characteristics of white supremacy that are showing up in systems and organizations, and actually work towards racial justice.
One of the things I'd love to add, I was thinking about the question that we were trying to figure out how we would integrate into here about challenges also in our work. And so I want to also push on 2 layers of the idea of solidarity, right? Because as a organization that was founded by 2 women of color, a Black woman and a Cambodian woman, we had a set of things that emerged for us, right? Was in a generational piece of what does it mean to build with people on a continuous level within our own generations in the context of our work. And I feel for myself, that is an ongoing lesson. I've started my work working with young people and creating space for young people, but still in the context of our work, whatever we're doing, that remembering that we're young people, that we're investing in their leadership to continue to grow and lead in this movement is a way of building solidarity. The other piece I want to challenge us around when we talk about solidarity is also in disability justice. I find that for myself, it's a 3-layered strategy. It's like, what am I learning? How am I shifting and changing? And then what are the principles and the practices that the institution that I am part of growing and developing, what are we doing to do differently? From the type of practices we have. And I feel like learning one of my biggest learning curves and really building internal solidarity at SISTA Fire is understanding what it means to work with people who are on the spectrum, they're neurodivergent. Language, things I've never heard of in the same way of what does that look like in our practices? It really challenges, what does our work look like? And I screw up all the time. I feel like, but what does my leadership say in that moment? When do I have to say, you know what, I am completely wrong. I have to take accountability for myself as leadership in the organization to say, where our work is moving too fast. We need to think about pace. We have to think differently about the fact that some of us have been in the work a lot longer than others. We have different levels of experiences. All of that, even internal to our organizations, play into building solidarity internally for me as a Black woman, right? And what does it mean to really learn the history and the work on the issues that people are experiencing? So women of color who are fighting in the disability justice movement and the work that they're doing, and becoming much more aware of that in terms of how we do that work together. And it's not always a perfect thing, but it is willingness to, one, acknowledge what you don't know and go out and do the work that needs to be done to learn how to do it. Taking accountability for your own actions. Don't put your shit on, excuse me, don't put your stuff on other people because you're learning. It's nobody else's job to teach you. It is my job to go and find the resources to learn, right? And so I think that solidarity for those of us who are people of color in this process also has layers to it. And then what does that mean for how we do our work as institutions become really critical and important in this process. And the last thing I will say, being located in a state of Rhode Island, where we are one of the only member-based organizing groups that are led by women of color that center Black women. I don't have the capacity to manage the white woman's fragility on a regular basis. I need, if you want to call that conversation yesterday was so powerful around ally and co-conspirator that I just was like, you know what, I'm going to get down with that. No more ally language for me, because I need to understand that you want to call Sister Fire when you need some people, right? Because nobody else has organized us. But there's lots of white advocates speaking for us. Talking about, but I read the data. You know, you read the trend data. You read what the national stuff is saying. What is happening locally? Because no one's ever collected our stories and allowed us to speak for ourselves. We're not looking for permission. We're doing our own work. We're organizing our own stuff. But we all have an accountability. We all have a stake in this process. And what are you willing to do as institutions, right? There's a huge difference between advocacy and organizing. And when Sister Fire showed up on the scene, where we have spent our summers, spent our springs in the community, asking people what's going on, what's impacting them, creating space for them to share, identify the issues they want to work on, identifying what's important to them. I'm not saying advocates should not exist. Yes, they should, because we have some really strong women of color who are advocates in Rhode Island. But at the same time, we have a whole bunch of other spaces that they're not. And I want us to really think about that layered strategy. What is the work you're doing on yourself? What is the work your institution is doing? And what are you doing to go out and build with other people in community? The other part of that for me means don't send me an email to say, will I join this, when you've never even had. Do a one-on-one, be an organizer. Do a one-on-one with me so you can get to know who I am and what I think and what's happening in my organization, because I'm not going to sign your letter. I am not going to just turn up and speak at your event because you want some people of color there. It's not happening, because that's not solidarity. You have to take the time to build relations. If you know anything about people of color, no matter what community you're in, the relationship between who we are and our food, break bread. Break some bread with some people. You just don't understand how it would change the game for you if you're willing to show up, put your own stuff aside and just listen and be part of a process. Because we do that for each other as people of color, as a way to build and to learn, and just know how to show up for other people. Thank you.
Folks, thanks so much for your reflections. Just to remind the everyone in the space, we are all showing up here as our full selves, which means we are not policing language. So we are so glad that people are comfortable in sharing their thoughts, wisdom, excuse me, as well as their life experience and the great works that they are doing. We're going to transition into one of our other questions. We're going to talk some more about youth and young people, because that's always important. And I don't think we hear enough about that. Ponny, what are your thoughts about how reproductive justice is being integrated into youth development as well as prevention efforts?
Thanks for asking. I feel like what we currently see with reproductive justice and youth development and what we've seen in, I want to say I'll start with just my upbringing. It hasn't been the best. And I think a lot of folks can attest to that. I think we kind of stop at education, but not even like a full scope, comprehensive, medically accurate education. There's still a lot of states where that is not necessary. There are states where they can legally teach young people like non-facts, like legitimate. There's curriculums across different states where they will tell young people, like, if you engage in this, you're going to get pregnant and you're going to, like, pretty much like Mean Girls, you're going to get pregnant, you're going to die. I hope you know the reference. It's a Mean Girl reference. But yeah, so it's really rigid. It's very like focus only on like the bare minimum. And then interestingly enough, like we're talking about like this, like, you know, coming together of reproductive justice and also violence prevention. I was at the National Sexual Assault Conference in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, maybe a month now. And we were talking about it. And again, I was speaking from a youth perspective. And someone asked, they're like, what does that look like in like youth advocacy, like bringing repro together with sexual violence prevention? And I said, interestingly enough, like as a young person, like all we've ever known from the repro that's available to us is sexual violence prevention. It is violence prevention. It's set up in this very like bad, you do a thing and a bad thing will happen. If you're not careful, if you jump into a relationship too soon, you're gonna end up in a bad relationship. Like it's always these very harsh, like, and rigid rules that are being taught to young people, which again is just another way how like we dehumanize young people, because we don't see them as full beings, right? We don't see them as like capable of experiencing joy, experiencing healthy relationships, experiencing pleasure, figuring out who they are. Like, and so that's why it's so important to push for comprehensive sexual education. And I have seen like a lot of wonderful curriculums that are being developed. I know Planned Parenthood does a really good job with developing a really good comprehensive, age relevant, culturally competent like curriculum on sexual health. Same with Advocates for Youth as an organization that I've worked with in the past that focuses a lot on that. GGE, again, like our work here with our reproductive framework is like pushing for that as well. Like, how can we get a comprehensive, culturally relevant sexual education curriculum? So and that's just the start, right? But then we go further than that. We think about young people again as like full beings. So what does it look like to have conversations about, you know, healthy relationships, about hygiene and health and mental health, right? About your body developing and like figuring out who you are, gender and sexuality, like all of these conversations that fall under the umbrella of like reproductive justice. I'm seeing like advocates are pushing for that. And like, we're in this space where like, that's what we're asking for. That's what we want to see federally. That's what across states. In Minnesota, I know I spent a lot of time working on, you know, talking to legislators and House reps about reproductive policies for the entire state. But there's so many other states and other advocates and organizers doing this type of work, but we're not there yet. And we're not there because people get afraid when you start talking to them about young people's reproductive health. Because again, and when I say people, I mean adults. I feel like we go through this stage in life where we kind of get this like amnesia where we forget being young people. I was actually arguing this with a colleague recently he's in his 30s, he's a dad now. And he's like, these kids nowadays, these kids. And I was like, we were listening to music that wasn't age appropriate when we were kids. We were also having our angsty young people moment. And he was like, wait. And I'm like, it's okay. It's the adult amnesia. So it's a thing that happens where you get to a certain age where you just kind of forget that, like, when you were a young person, you were a person. You didn't just one day become 25 and now you're a human being and now you have rights and now you have issues and now you're dealing with systemic inequities. You always were navigating systemic inequities. You always were navigating lack of access. And so with that, it's like, let's ground ourselves in that truth that, like, young people, they're whole, they're people already. They experience homelessness, they experience homophobia, racism, they experience, you know, inequities, and how can we support them? And so I think when we start talking to legislators around reproductive justice or reproductive access, I think it's important to, like, center everybody in the understanding that, like, you were young once, we were young once, like, we went through this. We all acknowledge, like, when you talk to a room of adults, everybody will tell you, my health, my sex ed was awful. It was bad. It was this, it was that. We laugh about it and we move on. But there's, like, usually a lot of people don't want to say, okay, well, like, how can we make it better? How can we make it a sex ed that would have worked for young you, that would have had you thriving, that would have helped you avoid some of the things that you ran into while you were developing? Like, let's not let these same stories, these same tragedies continue. So yeah, so that's kind of my response in a nutshell. A lot of moving pieces, but we're getting there. We're doing this work, and I'm so grateful to always be in company with folks who've been doing this work longer than me, because when we talk about, you know, solidarity, we all need to be partnered together. Like, young people are passionate and they're driven and they're running with this fire, but sometimes the knowledge and the know-how, you know, that's what we want to gain from our elders. Like, how do we maneuver in these systems, in these rooms? How do we talk to system leaders, community leaders, politicians, you know, like, how do we do all of these other things that we don't know? So I think there's great room for, like, solidarity, an intergenerational form of solidarity here with reproductive justice.
Ponny, you
Thank
know you
you.
ain't nothing
I
but
do
the
have,
truth. You ain't nothing but the truth, child.
you absolutely are. And
Listen, you
you
are.
absolutely are. You shattered my answer, by the way. I
I still
love
hear
your
it.
perspective. I am youthful. So I am going to share a little bit of my perspective. I have spent some time as a Title IX investigator. And in that time, I have found that oftentimes folks don't have nearly enough information about consent, what it looks like, what it should feel like. And so, similar to the things that you have already shared, I do think it is important for folks to be able to have a solid understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like. We all know that folks are younger and younger when they are finding themselves engaged in some kind of violent episode within relationship. And we do want to make sure that they're able to pick up on that earlier rather than later. And then, of course, from a sexual perspective, too many times I've had folks that have come into my office unsure about things, not sure what they consented to or not, and what it should have, what should and should not have happened. And so as I was scrolling through the chat, there is clearly a lack of comprehensive sexual health and sexual health education throughout the public school system. And so I do think some time spent on that would be beneficial because we're still continuing to see the same problems. Obviously, based on Ponny's response, it should be more expensive. I certainly agree, but I do think just a solid foundation is still needed because I don't feel like we're still not at a point where we're even getting a solid foundation. Any other thoughts, folks? And I do see your perspectives here in the chat. So, you know, feel free to ask us any questions that you may have. We're going to talk a little bit about.
Can I just add one more thing,
please,
Megan?
please.
I think just the thing that I would say is people have to go back to, and I feel like Sister Fire took really, we came in with some principles and practices to our work, but we really developed them over time based on what our members felt like were most important to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that if people don't have a set of principles that really guide how they do their work, right? Understanding whether they're young people or you work with young people about what does it mean to be intergenerational, all of those things are things that inside of your institutions, you need to be talking about. And what determines what guides you in that process, right? And really looking at that as an institution, looking at how the practice of that is integrated into how you do your work. Because you can't just shift into things because you heard it at a conference, right? You have to how do you take it back and really begin to have a conversation about some of the key things that you heard? And understanding your principles and understanding your practices and how they show up in your institution become really critical when you think about understanding, reproductive justice has 4 of those principles that I named one of them about safe and healthy environments but it was also the key one is about the human rights, right? Like all of this is about our human rights that we deserve and that we don't receive in the United States, and understanding the environment that we operate in now, because we're not in an environment where everything is wanted. It's a constant fight. What is guiding you? What's keeping your head focused in the right direction? How you build, what you do becomes really critical to how you think about that. What are the principles that guide you around how you engage with young people, how you engage with survivors? Like, what is your principle as an organization that survivors lead? For us, it's about those directly impacted lead first and foremost. That we are about building power, and we do that through the strategy of organizing. What is it that you're doing? What is your practice? What is your theory that you believe? And how are all of your staff and your members, if that's what you have, engaged in understanding that and practicing that?
Thanks for that, Ditra. I'm going to move us into the next question just for the sake of time, which is, what are the opportunities we see when movements come together? So
Oh, sorry.
I'm just going to repeat it.
Oh.
What are those opportunities that we see when movements come together?
I think there's opportunity for expansion. I think we've seen some opportunity for expansion and opportunity for perspective. I think we've kind of seen some of that really in this conversation already. We all bring, several different backgrounds, several different perspectives. I was really glad that we had some intergenerational diversity, because I think that's really important and sometimes gets lost, particularly in the way of leadership and training up and educating the next group of folks that are going to be taking over. I think it offers an opportunity for formalized alliances, because people get an opportunity to see, hey, you're impacted by this particular thing as it relates to youth because we're right behind you, or these are the folks that are right in front of you and this is what they're trying to educate you on. It's an opportunity to share resources, because oftentimes they're not nearly enough in the way of funds, but also in the way of just practical things that have to get done from an administrative perspective, writing letters, the organizing perspectives. And so, I think you have a situation wherein you have strength in numbers and a better opportunity for understanding. I looked in the chat and there were folks that didn't have some of these historical information shared. Some may or may not have known exactly how the word reproductive justice was even created. The word is used a lot. you know, in different communities without a real understanding of kind of why it was started. I think working with other organizations, you're able to educate them on that and why it's so important. And so those are some of the things that I think making sure that you engage with other movements and come together. I think those kinds of things are important, and why it's good when movements come together. Those are some of the opportunities or things that can be gained.
I think I would say that to add on to everything you said, Megan, I think it also like fosters efficiency, because I think when we're looking at other movements, like we're all fighting, you know, like capitalism, white supremacy, misogyny. We're all fighting like the same big bad guy, but we're just fighting it from different angles. We just have different, maybe, I don't want to say focuses. So like some of us are saying like, like if we create better, because I did early childhood policy work. So like that was big push on like, if we can help young children and their families when they're young and we can give them good academic, you know, foundations, they will be better in the future. It'll help them in their careers. It'll help them in their lives, which is like a great focus point, right? Like, and if you're talking racial justice, it's like, if we can tackle like racial inequities, maybe in healthcare, like it'll improve things. So we're all looking at it as like, how can we like disrupt this system? How can we fix the world where it works best for all of our families, all of our communities? We're just doing at it from like different places, right? Like in different sectors. But if we were to come together, like it makes a lot of the work that we're doing more efficient. And if we can see each other as allies, like, and I know we said we're going to get away from that word, but if we can see each other truly as like one whole, right? Like pieces of a whole, like it's communication's better. So like when you think about like, again, like with sexual violence and reproductive justice, like trying to create a system where we can all come together, how easy is it as like a repro justice advocate who is focused maybe more on, you know, things on the systemic level of like, how do we get these policies changed to support, you know, young people to have access to sexual education, right? If I'm dealing with young people and I'm in community with them and they're telling me about like something that's happening in their home, like if it's a domestic violence situation, how great is it that I can say like, let me point you in this direction, because like these are people that I'm in community with. This is an organization that focused on this. They have the manpower, they have the finances, the financial backing to like support you, to support your community in that way, even though it's something that maybe I don't have, you know, access, or like I don't have the financial backing, or I don't have the right tools. So I think like when we are able to work across movements, like we're able to truly like create something sustainable, that we know that's going to last, and that we know that's going to cater to like people in their entirety, rather than just being able to say like, we're doing great work here, but then what about the academic piece? And that's why like whenever, this is a funny thing for me, but whenever I'm talking careers and people are like, like if I'm interviewing for a job and they're like, what do you do? And I'm listing all the things, they're like, so how does reproductive justice and, you know, early childhood come together? I'm like, children and families. That's it. My thing is making sure that children have a great life, a great future. That's always been my passion. So any room that I can be in where we're talking, how do we make that happen? That's the room I'm in. And we need to be cross movement oriented in order to do that like very succinctly. So I guess that's what I would say my response is.
Yeah, I want to add to that too, because I think with domestic violence prevention, that is what we're trying to do, right? Like we know with reproductive justice, you should all have raised housing, food insecurity, like all of that, access to reproductive health. And with prevention, we're trying to strengthen economic supports for families. We're trying to make sure that people do have access to safe and affordable housing. Like we are doing the same work, but we're doing it in isolation. And so we might have access in the GV movement, right, to decision makers that maybe other groups don't have access to. However, we want the same thing. We have this same goal of creating healthy, thriving communities where everyone has their needs met and are able to actually thrive and be happy and have joy. And so for me, that's a clear opportunity for us to be working across movements. But the other piece is when we're working with in a real relationship with communities of color, and we are going to get honest feedback about where our services, what we do provide to the community, fall short. And so getting that call from like members from SISTA Fire that were dealing with folks and talking to folks on a regular basis that were also experiencing violence during the pandemic, and hearing like, hey, this person needs a place to go, or this person really needs to be able to get like a counseling appointment, and they can't wait. They can't be on a waiting list. And also then saying like, you know what, they tried to access those services, but they didn't work out because that counselor, like all the counselors or all the advocates were white, and they weren't able to like feel comfortable to talk about or fully share their experiences. Like that's an opportunity and a gift that we get when we are actually working across movements, that we can improve what we offer based on being in a real relationship and getting honest feedback about where we're falling short. And so I think that's an important piece that I wanted to be able to name here as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I agree with that, Lucy, I was just shaking my head as stories ran through, but it made a huge difference in the local movements here in Rhode Island of how much work the Rhode Island Coalition had started to do. And I want to just say that because they had been working hard to really also use a racial justice lens in their work. Lucy has not talked about that explicitly, but they've been working towards that. Who they were 5 years ago, 8 years ago, and who they are now look completely different. And I think that is really important to know the type of work institutions are trying to do as you try to build with them. Because a movement is made up of an ecosystem, right? There's member-based organizations, there's people who do different type of work, there's policy people, there's advocacy, so all. And so part of the work is, are these folks doing the work that they need to do? Because there's some services I'm not pointing our people to. I'm not. Because I know what they do in that building. And who am I to put somebody in that kind of position? And so I have to really understand what is the work people are trying to do inside of their institutions to be their best selves, to really address the issues around race, their biases and all of those things. Who are the people inside of their institutions? Who works there? All of that has implications of whether or not we can actually do something larger. Now for possibilities. I believe in Black Girl Magic. I believe in greater level of imagination. And I do think that is something that comes together. One of the things I love about the DV work that's happening is how diversified your ability to think in your prevention work. Like the prevention work that the DV movement is doing, at least in Rhode Island, has been really critical to expanding my understanding of DV itself. Because I was like, oh, y'all are down with that? Oh, wait, okay, let's think about this together. When Lucy invited us 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to be in the conversation around economic justice, I was like, okay, so what you all thinking about? Right? But to be in the room with people at the beginning of a process and be in the conversation, and then to see it materialize into actual work in the community, and that they followed it all the way through. To me, that's what movement work is about. That's what's building. And I think that for those of us who, my work comes out of racial justice and reproductive justice, but I think that it is the level in which we really are building outward in the ways in which we can align ourselves. I don't know a lot about what's happening in other places, but I'm really excited about the way in which you think about the prevention, right? Because then it creates all kinds of opportunities across the board in your work. And what does it mean for us to dream and imagine together? But I also think it also gives us the space of bigger things to fight for. I'm tired of fighting only for policy changes. I believe in policy change, but it's not the only thing our community needs. I want to fight for investments. I want to fight for money directly coming in to communities, for communities to make decisions about what they want, whether they wanted it to go into new housing, whether they wanted to go into new programming for young people, whatever the case may be, new gardens, whatever they want, that's what I want to be able to see. Where are people making investments, and how are our movements thinking directly about what our people want? How are we running campaigns that really are forcing people to divest resources out of the places that are not serving us? I'm gonna leave that one up to the imagination, but you know what I'm talking about. There's too many places, but I also understand the tensions that can exist in our work. And I learned this right through the DV, like divestment in certain areas can be challenging, but we can work together to figure out alternative strategy. But if we're not willing to try some things out together that aren't just normal, what are the alternative solutions? How are we building cooperatives to take care of children together? How are we building space, cooperative housing for young people, for young trans kids that are getting kicked out of their houses? That's a dag-on strategy for all of us to be working on that is not traditional to what it looks like. Where are we pulling money out of hospitals who are nonprofits who make a huge amount of money but ain't giving nothing back? What about the universities? We have to think about what are the alternative strategies. And I looked at the ASL person, realized, girls, slow down. All right, sorry about that. I got a little excited. But I just think that it opens up the possibility of how we think about our work. And one of the last thing I would say, as much as some of us are 501c3s, we are also individual citizens. And we have to think about what the hell's going on in electoral politics as movements, especially on the local levels, is where local level power can be built. And we have to think about what that could potentially look like. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ditra. I tend to agree, particularly with your last statement. I always, encourage folks to engage policy and remind them that policy isn't the only thing that we can be doing, but it is one of the things, one of the tools in our toolbox. And all of us have a lane and things that we can do. I do like to remind folks that these elected officials, these people do work for you, and sometimes they need to be reminded of that. So that concludes our presentation today, folks. I have scrolled through the chat, and I didn't notice any questions that we did not gather. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing the space. I enjoyed this very lively conversation, as well as the chat, and also engaging with my esteemed colleagues here.
Megan, I want to offer one last message, if I can, before we turn it over to Laban. And I think it's related to what Ditra was talking about around racial justice and the work that we've been doing internally to move towards being a more racially just organization. And I know that we're not alone in that. I know that domestic violence organizations across the country and coalitions have had conversations, and particularly during the pandemic, there was a more energy, or got re-energized to look at how can our movement become more of a gender racial justice movement and not just focused on gender. And people have invested a lot of time and energy in training, and have started to do some of the work. And I think there's a real opportunity here to, with working with BIPOC-led movements around racial reproductive justice, to do actively work in moving towards racial equity. So I think right now, a lot of it is we get stuck in training and like getting everything right and having the right language. And I think we didn't talk a lot about this around like the difference between like reproductive rights and reproductive justice, although that's been the focus of the entire conversation, right? But I think when I think about when I first started in this work, I thought they were one and the same, right? And they were used, in my head, they were used interchangeably. And I still think that's the reality in a lot of domestic violence programs, where we feel like, oh, we're already doing that work, because we've been doing advocacy around reproductive rights. And it wasn't until I got involved more deeply and became a member of SISTA that I was like, oh, we're not actually doing that. We could be doing more. We could go deeper. And so it's an invitation to domestic violence organization advocates that are on the call today, to do that. You've said you've made a commitment to wanting to be a more racial equitable movement. Let's stick to that, right? And let's start by building relationships with Black-led organizations. Let's start by really understanding the reproductive justice framework. And let's start building those relationships and working in solidarity with the movements that are happening in our community. And that's going to give us the opportunity to put that into action and not just be stuck in theory and in learning, but actually doing the work. And not being afraid to like mess up, because I'm constantly doing that, but really just taking the risk and trying it. Thank you.
I say yay to that. I think that you have to be willing to do the risk and take the risk. And if nothing, you got to start building relationships with Black-led institutions, but other BIPOC organizations, immigrant organizations, folks who are working on immigration issues across the board, African immigrant, Haitian immigrants. There's so many immigrant rights work that gets left out of the conversation. There's so many disability justice work. How are we building all of this, taking the time to build intentional with each other to learn about the work? And it's taking us a long time to get here. I hope it doesn't take us longer to get out of it, but you still have to build authentic relationships with people to make this stuff start to happen. Don't keep waiting and sitting behind your computer. Get out. I know people want to work from home. Come out the house, talk to people, be in relation.
Lavon, you're muted.
I knew that was going to happen. Thank you for that. Wow. I was just saying, wow. This has been even as powerful as yesterday. So thank you all for bringing us right back into that space where we left off. And Ponny, I don't know you, but what I do know, and I think, Ditra did say it, your young perspective on how you see us is just so awesome and so on point, and in the knowledge and wisdom that you bring. And I'm lifting you up because of your youthfulness and reminding us of our youthfulness. And so I just really, really want to thank you for that, and the amount of courage it takes and all of the learning you have done to be able to be in these spaces. So thank you so much for that great representation of the young people. Yes. So as we get ready to transition again, wow, and wrap our minds, and we want you all to come back. Again, like I said, I thank this panel and appreciate all the hard work you all put into bringing this information to us and to the audience. So thank you for that. Before we transition to our break, I'd like to remind everyone that you can access the wellness room at any time. So if you need to go there and just be for a minute, gather your thoughts, or listen to some good soothing music, please do that at any time by clicking on the breakout room button. It's located at the bottom of your screen, and selecting wellness. And so you are more than welcome to be in that space, either with yourself or others may be there with you. But definitely our Care Bears are there. Oh, that rhymes. Anyway, I know we are winding down our day. So now as I pass the floor back over to our awesome Town Hall Weaver, Monet Johnson, who will now transition us into break.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again. That was a really, really, really beautiful panel. Pony, I love you so much. I love every time you shout out for GGE. And thank you so much to the rest of the really amazing speakers. I'm really sitting with, I think one of you posed, like, what are the principles that people have as they do this work? I cannot get that out of my head. I think that was such a really wonderful invitation for folks on this call to go home with. And I hope people really answer that question for themselves. Pull out your journals tonight. Like, what are the principles that you do this work in? What are you grounded in? Like, what are you referring back to making sure that you're staying in alignment with those principles? I think that's so important. And Pony, I love when you said, like, young people are whole. So see them as such. I think that's another really beautiful thing for us to take into the rest of the day. So I'm really holding on to those two amazing viewpoints and everything else that you all said. As we move into break, I want to remind folks that you can still use the Padlet, where you can share what you're taking away from this third session. The link will be in the chat. And we also invite you to look at the illustration so far, and you can share your commitments moving forward in this work. So honestly, I would love if you answered that question of, like, what are the values that you are going to uphold in doing this work? I think that's a great prompt question. We're going to come back from break at 3 p.m. So please get your needs met. Check in with your body. We're talking about some heavy things here, even though we're talking about them a little fast and we're laughing, they still are heavy things. So please check in with your body, and we will be back at 3.